Hey friends, it's Hurley and welcome to another video. I've designed 3 stencils in my product line that have kind of a smaller design scale like this one, and in today's video I'm going to share a couple different creative ways to use them, but really just some great stencil techniques that you guys need to try. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so I'm starting off with this stamp set called The Best Things in Life, and I love the floral image in the stamp set because it's got lots of great detail to it, and it's quite large, which is great for the technique I'm doing today. So I'm going to stamp this down, but I'm using the stick and stamp mat from Brutus Monroe. I like this one because it fits inside the MISTI, and I'm able to place my cardstock in the center of the mat and have it stick down. You'll see me use this a lot throughout today's video. It's been a tool I've been loving. The reason why I use it for this first image is because I wanted to stamp the image off of my cardstock, and you can't do that if it's in the edge of the MISTI. So I placed it in the center, placed down my image, and now we can get to our stamping, and it's going to stay in the exact same spot. So I'm stamping this down in VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink for a really great detailed image, and then I'll give it some good pressure in my MISTI to make sure everything transfers nicely. Once that image is all stamped down, I can then pull it off my mat just by bending the mat backwards, and that ensures your cardstock's going to stay nice and straight while it gets removed. Next, I'm going to throw over a layer of clear heat embossing powder, and you guys know that I love to do this for a nice finished effect and shine to the stamping, but also I'm doing a little bit of watercoloring next, and I find that that little bit of raised dimension helps kind of keep the watercolor inside of the lines as I color. So just heat setting that until it turns clear and shiny, and then we can do my watercoloring. For this, I'm going to create a palette of inks. I'm just using my Hurley Create ink pads, and I just take them and smoosh them down onto my craft sheet with all the different colors that I want to use for my watercolor. Then I'm going to go in with a little bit of water and a paintbrush and start my coloring. I first start out with just the plain water and add it down onto the image. This kind of preps the cardstock for the color that's about to go on, and also applies it a little bit smoother. Because it's used to that little bit of moisture, the color has a little bit more playtime on the surface without sinking right in. So then I add a nice wash of color over the top, nice even color, and then I go in with a little bit less water and use that same color to add a little bit of depth and dimension and shading to the image. So again, on the pink flower here, I started off with water, then I'm adding down a layer of color with a little bit of water and color to give it a nice light wash, and then I'll go in finally to add a little bit of depth and dimension. To ensure that I get the most control too, I love to use just a regular paintbrush. Here I'm using one of Ranger's artist brushes in their smaller size. I love this because it's at a great price point, but also you can dip it in the water and really control how much water you're adding to the surface, rather than using a water brush that kind of puts out as much water as it wants. So here I can really control if I want the color to be lighter or darker by adding more or less water to the image. Also with this one, I wasn't too particular in how much shading I added or if it looked perfect in the end, because I am going to do kind of a stenciling technique over top, so you're not going to be able to see every little detail of my watercoloring. When I did the green here, I again added a little wash of color, and then for the second color, I brought in Tropical Tango, which was a little bit darker, and brought in a different variation of color. Then I'm going to add this down onto my stick and stamp mat once again, once it's all dry, and then I'm going to go in with one of my stencils. Here I'm using the tiny circle stencil to add some texture over the top of it. I'll lay that stencil right down over top, and then I'm going to go in with some detail blending tools and my same color ink pads. This is going to give me kind of a tone-on-tone blend of that same color that I added down, but give it a little bit more texture and dimension with these polka dots on top. I'm going to go in using these detail blending brushes from Altenew, and you can also use the detail blending tools from Ranger to go on top of these images and just make sure that I'm staying inside the lines. A bigger blending tool is way too large to get into the surface area, but I love these little tiny tools and brushes to get into these details and add this dimension on top without having to mask anything off on the surface. Just using the brushes and ensuring that I stay inside the lines. The reason why I love these little tiny stencils so much too is because the tiny polka dots and designs on them are so small. So when you use them on an image like this that's not super huge, you can still see the design pattern of the polka dots rather than using a stencil that had larger designs all over it. So once I lift that off, you get tons of texture and really fun dimension on top of that image because of that little polka dot stencil and the blending tools that we used. I love that it gives it kind of a playful and fun effect. Again, I'll lift that off my stick and stamp mat then, and we'll go in and cut out this image. I decided to fussy cut the image so I could add it on a colorful background and give it a little bit more detail and dimension on the card. I'm using my Fiskars Spring Assist scissors to do this because they spring back out at you so your hands won't get tired, and also they're really great at getting into some of the smaller details of these images. I also like to leave a little bit of a white border all the way around the image. This is because if I add it onto a colorful background, it'll really stand out against the background, and it's a little bit easier than going right up to the edge of the image. You don't have to be as precise or perfect. So once I'm done cutting that out, then we can work on our background. To do this, I'm using some Lunar paste, which is a beautiful shiny paste, and I'm going to add this down onto a glass craft sheet with a palette knife. Then for a simple but stunning background design, I'm going to use the tiny diamond stencil for a nice tone-on-tone stenciled effect. I'm going to lay this stencil right down onto my surface, and then I'm going to use a blending tool to kind of pick this up off of my palette there, and then dab it onto the surface. I'm going in kind of a blending motion back and forth. I find that's going to apply the color super fast with this paste, and also it's going to give a nice smooth effect all the way across. I like to add paste down like this with a blending tool or blending brush because it applies it in a thinner manner. You're still getting all that beautiful color and shine to it, but you don't have to wait as long for it to dry because it's not super thick at all. So then once I'm done, I can lift this off the background and it gives a beautiful tone-on-tone effect, but it's got tons of beautiful shine to it as well. It really stands out nicely. So then once that's all complete, I'm going to clean this stuff off really quickly by spraying down some water onto my stencil and wiping it off with a paper towel or cloth. You want to make sure to clean things off before they dry with this paste on top of it. Now when it comes to blending tools too, you can clean these off pretty easily when it's still wet. Just spray it down with water and tap off all the excess color until your sponge is pretty much back to white. If you leave any color inside there, it's going to kind of get crusty and not as usable. But if you clean it out right away, you can use it over and over. If you bring this under a sink too, rinsing it out will be a really easy way to clean this off and get it back to new. Once we're done cleaning, we can then go in with the floral and add it onto our card base using a little bit of foam tape for some dimension. And then when I want to add down the sentiment, I'm going to use the Bold Bouquet stamp set from Hurley Create. The images in this set are just beautiful, but I also love all of the sentiments. They're super versatile and there's lots of mix and match sentiments for different occasions. I like to use the clear sheet to see which one's going to fit best, and I decided to go for the sentiment that said "I'm here for you," which is really simple but can be used in a lot of occasions. I'll stamp this down using some black ink on white cardstock, and again throwing over a layer of clear heat embossing powder to finish it off and give it some nice shine. I'll heat set that until it's clear and shiny, and then I can cut it out and add it down onto the card. That finishes off things really nicely. I love that we were able to use the tiny circle stencil on top of that colored image for a little bit more dimension and playfulness, and then using the tiny diamonds in the background to finish it off with some detail. Alright, then for the next card, I'm going to use the Brutus Monroe Stick and Stamp Matte again and stick down a piece of my struck white cardstock. Then I'm using the tiny diamond stencil, and I'm going to place that over top, holding the stencil down using the edges of the Stick and Stamp Matte, which is just brilliant. Then I'm going to go in with an ink blending tool, and for my first layer, I'm just blending down a layer of my Hurley Create ink. Here I'm using a blue tone, which is Clear Skies, and a Gina K blending brush, but you can use any sort of blending tool to just get a nice smooth layer of ink over top of my stencil. It's a really easy first layer, but it gets really cool once we start shifting it. So once this is done, I can then lift off my stencil, and we've got ourselves a beautiful background already, and you could leave it there if you want to just stop working right there. But I'm going to take this off the mat. To clean off your Stick and Stamp Matte, I just spray it with water and really lightly rub across the surface, which will remove the ink, and then once it dries, it becomes nice and sticky again. Then I'm going to go in and lay my stencil right over top again, but this time I'm shifting it. And since these tiny stencils have really just simple geometric patterns over top, it shifts in a really cool way that you can kind of build a pattern out of it. Here I'm creating sort of an argyle look by shifting the diamonds over a little bit, and then I'm going to use a little bit of shiny Lunar paste in the color Sike, and I'm going to add this as my second layer. Again, I'm applying a little bit down to the glass craft mat and using it kind of as a palette to control how much I apply down to my surface as kind of a palette. Then I'll pick this up with a foam blending tool and I'll just smooth it over top of the surface as my second layer over top of this stencil. It creates a really great look, and I love using Lunar paste as another layer to add a little bit more color but also tons of shine. It really adds a bunch of interest to the background rather than just adding another layer of ink. Once I've smoothed that across the whole surface like this, I can then lift it off, and you'll see this stuff dries in about a minute or two when you apply it this thin, but it still gives all of the same amount of shine, which is just gorgeous. Check that out, and I love the lime green color that it gives too. Then again, you want to clean things off really nice and quickly, so I'll use just a little bit of water to clean off my stencil, and also we can wash off my sponge as well. You want to clean off your sponge once again until it turns nice and white again, and then it'll be usable for the next time and it won't turn crusty if you've cleaned it out nicely. So just kind of keep dabbing that off until it becomes nice and clean, and then you're ready to go. And then here's another look at that finished background. I love how it looks, and that shine is just beautiful once it's all complete. So then to finish this card off, I'm going to use the Sentimental flower stamp set. You guys can see this one is super stained because I've used it so much. I love how versatile it is. I'm going to use the medium-sized flower and stamp it down using some black ink. Now this has some really great line work detail to it that I just love. So once I've stamped that down, again I'm going to go in with a little bit of clear heat embossing powder. You guys know by now that I love doing this, and I just love the kind of gloss that it gives. It adds a nice finished shine to your project. So once I've heat set that until it's clear and shiny, I'm going to then stamp down a couple different leaves as well. I love using some different leaves in this to add some foliage to finish off the kind of floral effect that we're giving here. I'm also going to throw over a layer of clear heat embossing powder so that it matches and has that same clear shine to it. Heat set it until it's clear and shiny, and then we'll move on to our technique. So to color these in, I wanted to do it super quickly and not waste any time, so I decided to kind of go in with some blending tools and my Simon Hurley Create ink and go outside the lines as I'm coloring these, but just use inks to kind of blend them in. So I went in with a mini ink blending tool and I blended out the yellow color, and then I went in with these detail blending tools from Ranger and just went in and did some detailed shading. So I added a little bit of orange to kind of add some dimension to the center, and then some brown right in the center to fill in that little space. Then for the leaves, I did the same thing. I added a light green color and then went in with a little bit of a dark green for some shading. I love that those little detail blending tools provide so much versatility when I want to go in and color things and get a little bit more detailed with the coloring to make it look more realistic. Then I'm going to go in and fussy cut these out. Again, I'm using my Fiskars Spring Assist scissors to do it super easily, but I wanted to share this technique because you don't always have to stay inside the lines, and if you're going in and fussy cutting it out, I love that we're able to kind of save some time on the coloring by not having to worry about that, but you still get a super clean image because I went in afterwards and cut them out anyways. So you're saving a little bit of time on one of the steps. Then I'm going to go in and add it down onto my card using a little bit of foam tape. And then once I've added the flower down, I can tuck the leaves underneath. For this, I used a little bit of liquid adhesive, and then once I tucked them underneath, I just gave them a little press. And I like to put the leaves kind of across from each other, usually in a little grouping, and then one on the other side. Then once I finish that, I'll start on the sentiment. I'm using the Hello Friend sentiment from the Sentimental Flower stamp set, and I'll stamp it down onto some black cardstock using some clear sticky Versamark ink. Then I'll throw over a layer of white heat embossing powder for some great contrast. I'll heat set this until it turns nice and bright white, and I love how a heat embossed sentiment looks on my black cardstock. Now when it comes to the sentiments, I do like to fussy cut these out as well. I know it seems like I'd like to do a lot of fussy cutting, but when it comes to sentiments, I like to do this so that it shows off more of the background, and also it gives the sentiment a more finished look, rather than just stamping it down onto a rectangle of cardstock and leaving it like that. So then once this is all complete, my card is finished. I love how this looks with the nice floral in the center there, and then having that background with the tiny diamonds and shifting it like that to get that beautiful argyle effect that we have. I just love how it looks in the end. For the last card, I'm going in using the Sketch Floral stamp set, and I love all the different images and vases in this set to kind of build your own floral arrangement. I'm starting off with one of the vases and stamping down using some black ink again onto my stark white cardstock. Then once I've stamped down that vase, I can then choose a flower to put inside, and for this, I wanted my vase to be clear so there was no masking needed, but if you didn't want to see the stem, you could always mask off the bottom with a little bit of masking tape and it would be good to go. So once I've done my stamping, you guys know the drill by now. We're throwing over a layer of clear heat embossing powder and heat setting it until it turns nice and clear and shiny. When it comes to heat embossing powder also, make sure you don't heat it too much, just until it turns, otherwise it kind of sinks into the cardstock and doesn't be as shiny anymore. Trust me, I've learned the hard way. So then I'm going to use the Vases Stencil, which has the coordinating vases to match up with this so that it's really easy to color them in. I'm going to then use a little bit of ink blending and my breakup blue color to blend this face out. Now when it comes to using stencils, I love that you can also layer these tiny stencils over top. So here I used the tiny circle stencil, just laying it over top, that way the vase is still masked off, but now you're also adding that texture over top really super easily. Here I'm just adding a little bit more of the same color ink, and there we have polka dots now inside of our vase for a little bit more interest. To color in the flowers super simply, I'm just using a little bit of my Salmon Hurley Create ink, and again, these detail blending tools, I'm telling you guys, these are a game changer. They come in like a pack of 5, but they come in handy so often when I want to use ink in smaller areas. So this was super simple to color this in really quickly and get nice color on my flower. So once I've done that, I can then go in and start on my background. For this, I'm using the Whimsical Oval Stencil and Mask set. I love this set because it creates really easy kind of whimsical and abstract backgrounds. For this one, I wanted to just use the larger oval shape. I lined it up where I wanted it on my card, and then I'm going to ink blend using a little bit of Over the Moon ink. I love this light yellow color for a nice warm and happy glow in my background. And I'm just starting off on kind of the left side and blending out to the right side, leaving the left side have a little bit more ink so that it stays a little bit darker, and then fading off towards the right. Now when it comes to kind of layering stencils, again, I'm using one of the tiny stencils. This one happens to be the tiny heart stencil, and I'm going to lay it over top and ink blend using the exact same color again. This then again will have the oval already masked off, and then we're just adding this texture really easily over top. I kind of lifted it to check, and I decided I wanted a little bit more dimension to those hearts, so I added a little bit more ink over top, and there we have our beautiful background. It was super simple and easy to do, but I love that we just added a little bit of color for this flower to sit on. So then I'll add the flower down using some foam tape, and then for a sentiment, I went in that same sketch floral stamp set. I love some of the bold strip sentiments in here, and I just went with the Love You sentiment. Again, one last time is a charm. I'll throw over some clear heat embossing powder and heat set that until it's clear and shiny for a nice finished look for that sentiment. Then I'll add it down right onto my card next to the floral, and I love how this one turned out. Layering stencils is a super easy way to get lots of texture in there, and there's not too much work because everything's already masked off for you. But the floral on top of this card is just beautiful. Alright guys, I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up and leave me a comment down below on which card was your favorite. Also down in the description box is a full supplies list linked for you guys, and using those links really helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you guys soon. Have a great day. Bye!